Hey all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today I'm going to be discussing a serial killer that I had previously mentioned in an episode of the Colorado Jane Doe. So let's get into it, shall we? Albert H. Glatman was born in New York City, but moved to the Bronx and worked in the garment industry. In 1925, he worked for the Instructo Millinery Supply Company, where he met coworker Ophelia Gold. The two started dating and eventually got married. Together, they opened up a small stationery store, and shortly after, Ophelia found out she was pregnant. Harvey Murray Glatman was born in the Bronx on December 10th, 1927, the only child of the couple. Ophelia stated that Harvey seemed like a normal, healthy child, but by 3 or 4, she realized he exhibited some strange behaviors. He would tie a string around his own penis, place the loose end in a drawer, and then lean back against the string. And yes, I said at 3 or 4. Still, Ophelia just thought it was odd, but it wasn't enough to take him to see any type of professional. Ophelia was labeled as indulgent to Harvey, while Albert was a strict disciplinarian. When Harvey started school, he was, by all accounts, considered a good student. In the late 1930s, the family moved to Denver, while Albert Glatman started as a taxi driver and Ophelia worked at Hollywood Hat Shop. By this time, Harvey was using rope for his neck as part of an autoerotic asphyxiation. In school, he continued to do well. In junior high, the standardized testing scored Harvey between very superior, high, and excellent. Though his mental evaluation, there was a note that Harvey could be, quote, easily offended, end quote. His attendance was good, and he got a job working on Saturdays at this time. In 1942, he started at East High School, where he played the cornet and band, and was in the top 7% of his class. His mother says at this time that he was shy with girls and would even cross the street to avoid them, because he didn't want to be rejected or even potentially rejected. However, that soon changed. By 1944, Harvey was out prowling, breaking into apartments where only females lived. In one apartment, he stole a .38 revolver. Since he had the revolver, he increased his crimes. Harvey would find women, tie them to telephone poles, and partially disrobe them. Yeah, disgusting. On May 4th, 1945, Eula Johann was on her way home from the movies when Harvey tied her to a telephone pole, partially undressed her, and stole $2. 4 days later, Harvey broke into Elma Hammam's house, believing it was empty. She came home and surprised him, causing him to flee. She immediately called the police, and they came out to search, eventually finding young Harvey with another stolen gun and a length of rope taken from another burglary. Harvey immediately told police of his string of crimes, and by the 21st was charged with first-degree robbery of Eula Johann for that $2. His mother bailed him out the next day. Reports vary on whether Harvey did graduate with his class of 1945 or not. In either case, shortly after July, Harvey came across Noreen Laurel. He abducted her, bound her, and potentially molested her, though at this time did not move on to rape, and again, the sources vary here. He kept her throughout the night and let her go in the morning. That afternoon, he was arrested. At this time, his parents finally had him seen by a psychiatrist, Dr. J.P. Hilton, who diagnosed Harvey as a schizophrenic. Still, by September 30th, he was back in jail. This time he had to wait to go to court, which occurred in November. He pled guilty to robbery and was sentenced to 1 to 5 years in prison. From there, he was transported to Colorado State Penitentiary on December 15th, 1945. A physician at the penitentiary disagreed with the schizophrenia diagnosis and instead diagnosed him with psychoneurosis compulsive or anxiety disorder without depression. Harvey served 8 months of his sentence and was released on July 26, 1946. He was 18 years old at this time. Immediately, Ophelia moved him out of Denver, and the two returned to New York City. There, he bought a pocket knife and a plastic gun that was passable for the real thing, and immediately went back to his modus operandi. He was back out on the prowl. On the August 17th, he struck again. Olga Metrick and Rose Gianzera were walking home when Harvey found them, pulling his gun. Rose screamed loud enough, another man came running, which, of course, caused Harvey to flee. But Harvey wasn't done. He came across Thomas Starrow and Doris Thorne, who were also out walking. Again, he brandished the gun, and Harvey had the pair walk off the path, forcing Thomas to kneel, and then bound him, stealing his money. Harvey then moved on to Doris, forcing her up against a tree where she was bound, and Harvey began to undress her. But Thomas had managed to get free of his ties and charged at Harvey. In turn, Harvey slashed at Thomas with his knife, connecting several times, though not enough to kill Thomas, just injuring him, allowing Harvey to get away. Harvey immediately skipped town and moved on to Albany. Of course, the very next night, he was out. This time, he follows Florence Hayden as she headed home. He ran up behind her as she walked and put the fake gun to her back and stole $20 from her, and then directed her to a nearby backyard. He tried to bind her hands, but Florence realized that he needed both of his hands to bind her, and so she turned and pushed him and screamed as loud as she could. Harvey, of course, ran. On the 23rd, he found two women out, Beverly Goldstein and Evelyn Berger, robbing them and taking off. They went straight to the police. Police Commissioner James Kerwin and Night Chief William Moore put together a plan, having their men patrol the area that this unknown assailant seemed to be working. By the 25th, Harvey was caught while stalking more women to attack, arrested with a fake gun, rope, and money. He was then taken to his apartment where police found items from many of his victims. By the 28th, he was indicted for robbery with force and putting life in danger. He was also quickly connected to his other crimes and faced multiple charges from their jurisdictions. The judge denied bond at this time, labeling him as a flight risk. Eventually, Harvey realized it would be better to take a plea deal, so he pleaded guilty to first-degree grand larceny in October. At sentencing, he was given 5 to 10 years at Elmira Reformatory for juveniles. Recall at this point, he's only 18. In order to have him evaluated by a psychiatrist. Here it is noted that he was given sodium almithol, the truth serum as it has been called, that was believed to allow people to open up more freely. Harvey had always been a talker to police about his crimes, and with a psychiatrist, it seemed to be no different. At the end of his sessions, he was diagnosed. This time, psychopathic personality disorder, schizophrenic type, with sexually perverted impulses, as the basis for his criminality. After his evaluation, he was transferred to Sing Sing in September of 1948. There, he completed a radio repair class and was on good behavior, getting 6 months taken off his sentence. And I've spoken about this before, but of course he was on quote-unquote good behavior in prison. He was under constant supervision and wasn't near his would-be victims. Ridiculous that he gets time off for being unable to perpetrate any more crimes because he was under lock and key. Anyway, with that reduction, he was set to be released on April 16th, 1951, and remain on parole until September 1956. But on the day of his release, he wasn't sent out into the world. Instead, he was met at the gates by officers of Yonkers and brought to their jail. They wanted their pound of flesh for their robbery and stabbing of Thomas Starrow. Unfortunately, at this time, Harvey had a good defense, and they used the right to a speedy trial and miraculously won the case, which I feel like wouldn't fly if this were to have happened more recently, as cases often get held and tried if people get out. Anyway, in his case, charges were dismissed. Harvey went home to Colorado to serve his parole time, and for 3 years, didn't get a job, though it was a stipulation of his parole. In 1952, his father Albert passed away. Ophelia opened up her own hat shop, which left Harvey home alone. In 1954, Harvey finally did get a job at a butcher shop, but he stayed on for a measly 10 months. On September 7, 1956, parole was finally completed, and by January of 1957, Harvey left Colorado, this time heading west to Los Angeles. There he enrolled in television repair at the National Technical School. He got a job as a television repairman, which paid his rent. It unfortunately also gave him time to pick up his quote-unquote passion, which was photography. Of course, it wasn't a passion like a love project, it was just his route to get closer to women. At this time in particular, every woman seemed to want to be a model in this area. He began photographing women at various LA studios, which helped garner himself a name. And maybe he kept some of these photos for himself. He went out and bought a .32 automatic pistol. Some reports say at this time California didn't really require ID or do any background searches, so nobody knew that he was already a convicted felon, and he was just freely given this pistol. Then he began hatching his plan. His first target was Linda Leichels, a model that he had actually previously photographed. On July 13th, he actually went out to her apartment, but Lynn wasn't home. Instead, he was met at the door by Betty Ruth Carver, another model recently in from Florida. Harvey asked Betty to see Lynn's portfolio, and as she went to get it, noted another woman's photo on the wall. When she returned, he asked about it, finding out it was actually another roommate, Judith Ann Dole. Using the alias Johnny Glenn, Harvey called the apartment several times, until on August 1st, he finally got a hold of Judy, somebody he really wanted to meet. He told her he had a rush job and asked if she was interested. At first she hesitated, so he offered to do the photo shoot at her apartment, and she agreed at a 2 p.m. meeting. When he arrived, Harvey stated that another friend had offered to let them use the studio, and would it be okay? Judy was hesitant, but went. See, she needed the money. And the pair ended up at Harvey's apartment. Harvey told Judy that the photos were for a True Detective magazine, so she needed to be bound for the photographs, which again she seemed to hesitantly comply to. After the photographs were done, Harvey showed Judy his gun and told her that he was going to have his way with her and to comply or he'd kill her. Harvey later reported carrying her to the living room where she got a nosebleed that he ended up cleaning up for her. Judy said she wouldn't fight because she was in the middle of a custody hearing coming up with her ex-husband and didn't want to make a fuss about anything. Harvey unbound her and made her take off her clothes, then photographed her on the couch before raping her. Twice. After, he allowed her to get dressed and then decided what he was going to do next. Meanwhile, photographers were calling the friend's apartment for missed appointments. Judy's ex-husband also called saying they urgently needed to discuss a matter of their daughter, Suzanne. And a contractor called after she missed a date arranged where he actually brought a lawyer for her to talk to. Harvey had supplied a number as they left, but it turned out to be a local print shop. Friends called the police and a bolo was sent out for Judy. After 10 p.m., Harvey stated he would like to take Judy far away to make her catch a bus back, giving him time to get out of the area if she decided to go to police. He tied Judy's arms and brought her to the car and drove 100 miles into the desert, then pulled off the road saying he wanted her one more time, getting out a blanket and more rope, walking a distance away from the car with her. Then he sat Judy on the blanket and once again bound her. This time she was face down, and he essentially hogtied her before wrapping the rope around her neck and strangling her. He then drug her body away from the area and covered her with sand, taking back one of her shoes with him. He retrieved all his rope and the blanket and put them in the back, in the trunk, and then simply went home. On December 29th, a man walking his German Shepherd found a skull. He immediately called police, and they came out, declaring a homicide as, quote, "she didn't bury herself," end quote. The coroner, however, didn't get much right about her, originally estimating her age between 30 and 35, not 19 as she was, that she had been in the elements for probably a year or two, when in reality, it was less than 6 months since she was murdered. Harvey originally left LA after this and went back to Colorado, but that was short-lived before he decided he was going to head back out to LA anyway in 1958. There, he called a dating service in order to satisfy him, using the alias George Williams. But his first date really wasn't his type, so he tried again. The second time, he met Shirley Ann Loy Bridgeford, a 24-year-old, a single mother of 2. After the date, Harvey stated that they necked in his car, but didn't go any further as Shirley originally refused sex. Harvey told her he'd drive her home, but went the opposite direction, and when she realized it, he pulled a gun on her. She complied with all of his demands after that. Harvey got out his rope and blanket and made her walk miles away from the car before setting her down. There he bound her, took photographs, and raped, then strangled her, taking her underwear as a souvenir, then tucking her under a cactus before packing up his belongings and again, simply driving home. On March 9th, Shirley's mother Alice reported her missing. After getting a statement of what Harvey looked like, detectives realized it was likely the same man in Judy's case and realized that Shirley was probably already dead. You see, in both cases so far, Harvey has met with people. So he met the roommates for Judy, and in this case, he actually met Shirley's mother and friends and sons before she took him out, or he took her out on this date. Next, Harvey found Ruth Rita Mercado, another aspiring model who put ads out in the paper for her services. Harvey called her, letting her know that he saw her ad in the paper and introduced himself as Frank. After a short conversation, the two planned to meet up the next coming Tuesday, July 22nd, for a photo shoot. But when Harvey arrived that afternoon, Ruth had to apologize. She was sick and wouldn't be able to complete the planned shoot, and would he take a rain check? Ruth stated that she would have called but didn't have his number, and Harvey stated that was okay, he'd check back in with her later. Indeed he did. He stalked her like prey. The very next night, he went back to her apartment. But at first nobody was home, so he went to a bar and spent some time there before going back again to her apartment. This time he needed to park far away because the parking lot was full. He went back to her door and she answered. She allowed him in, and as she was putting her dog in the bathroom so that he would quit barking, Harvey closed the security latch and drew his gun. When she returned, it was to a pistol, and Harvey demanding they go to the bedroom. There he bound her, but ended up untying her in order to get her undressed, then assaulted her several times, before having her dress, tying up her arms again, and taking her to the car. Harvey took her out into the desert and photographed her all day the next day. Then as night fell, he bound her on the blanket he had and hogtied her, killing her. This time he left her in the open, packing up his belongings and simply leaving. Again, he did take some souvenirs. Everything else he pretty much threw out of the car as he drove down the road, according to him. On July 27th, the apartment manager went to Ruth's. Her mailbox was overflowing, and there he ended up finding her dog locked in the bathroom, half-starved. He informed Ruth's mother via a letter. Francisca received the letter in Plattsburgh, New York, days later, and called the authorities back in LA. But Ruth was labeled as a stripper and ended up as a low-priority bulletin, which even stated on it, quote, mental condition, poor, end quote. So needless to say, at first there was no investigation into her at all. To find his next victim, Harvey didn't travel far outside his comfort zone. He went to the Diane studio in Hollywood, calling himself Frank Johnson there. Diane had known him and even posed for him a few times, but Harvey seemed to be losing control. His obsession with women led him to not really caring about trivial things such as, personal hygiene. So when he showed up to the studio on October 27th, Diane declined to be photographed, owing to his offensive odor. But She did actually offer another girl, Lorraine Vigil, a 28-year-old model, so long as he paid the studio fee of $22.50 along with $15 for the model herself. He agreed, and Diane called Lorraine, telling her that she had booked her very first job and he would come pick her up in a half an hour, and then they would go back to the studio to be photographed. She ended up actually calling a second time to warn Lorraine that the photographer was a little creepy and she needed to watch herself. When Harvey picked her up, he stated there was a change of plans. Diane ended up needing her studio for a different party, so they were going to go to his studio in Anaheim. And again, this is Lorraine's very first job, so while she might have thought he was creepy, she let it go. But then he took the highway towards Santa Ana. After a while, he pulled over saying they had a flat, and when she started to protest, Harvey pulled out a gun, then told her he wanted sex and needed to bind her. As he began to tie her hands, she also realized that he had to use both hands and pulled away from him, but Harvey quickly grabbed her neck. He picked up the gun, but Lorraine wasn't done fighting. She managed to get a hand on the gun, and they fought. The gun ended up going off, striking her up the thigh. Harvey seemed shocked, and Lorraine used that shock and hesitancy to grab the door handle and jumped out of the car. Harvey sprinted out after her, and the two began wrestling on the ground. Lorraine at this point actually got control of the gun just as a passing police officer stopped, seeing the pair in the midst of a struggle. She ran to the patrolman, Thomas Mulligan, screaming that he was trying to kill her, but she got his gun, handing it over to Mulligan as she reached him. Harvey was arrested for days and said nothing, while police went to his apartment to search it. Harvey made an error, however, when he agreed to be polygraphed. Due to the nature of his crimes and his likeness to the suspect in other cases, while he was being polygraphed, they asked about Ruth. Harvey made the mistake of believing police had found his toolbox and knew of all of his crimes. He then began admitting to strangling Ruth and stated, quote, "I killed a couple other girls too," end quote. Going back to Harvey's, they did indeed find a toolbox in the garage filled with photographs and other souvenirs of his victims, positively tying him to the missing and murdered women. Police had him take them to where he killed Shirley and Ruth. At both sites, scavengers had made off with the bulk of remains by this time, but human bones were found at both sites, and police searched the areas at this time, attempting to retrieve as much of each woman as they were possibly able. Police questioned him about other women in which he was believed to have been the killer, but he denied any further killings. This does include the Boulder Jane Doe that I did a case on. The reason that I learned of Harvey Glatman in the first place, and the fact that he could remember all of his other victims and openly admitted his actions, as well as taking souvenirs, but denied that of the other two that he was accused of, gives me pause. Maybe he wasn't the one that actually murdered them. On November 8th, 1958, the San Diego County Grand Jury indicted him on 2 counts of first-degree murder for Shirley Ann Bridgeford and Ruth Mercado. On the 21st, Harvey stood in front of the judge, John Hewicker, and pleaded guilty on both counts of murder. On December 15th, 1958, prosecution and defense brought in details to, either help or hurt Harvey's character in order to attempt to affect his sentencing. 2 days later, Harvey was sentenced to death. He was to await the completion of his sentence on death row at San Quentin Prison. And on September 18th, 1959, Harvey was brought to the green room, and his sentence was carried out via lethal gas. Harvey was 31 years old at the time of his death, and Ophelia never went to claim his body, but she did make an organ donor prior to his execution. And with that, that is the end of the case of Harvey Glatman. To all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.